we in boxing put on great boxing fights. They put on entertainment, uh, and I think that's what the difference is between them. You know, they're really not trying to put on uh, great fights. But yet, I have to say, the opening TV bout was one heck of a fight, and the matchmaking that Eric Botcher did on that card was pretty darn good.
See, I'm going to take my little spin on what Andrew was saying about how the playoffs lead to the Super Bowl. When it comes to someone like Boots, why isn't he on that undercard of a Spence Crawford? Why aren't we actually stacking cards, truly stacking cards, and make meaningful shows that are going to lead to something greater in the future? Or even having maybe Boots versus Thurman the week or two before and having cross promotions on those, because one of the great things that I think that the UFC does is they'll have a title fight and they'll have another fight that could literally be a headliner. And boxing just doesn't do that. It's all about the main, and then they're going to kind of throw in, not saying that they end up being bad fights, but fights that aren't going to mean anything for the two main event guys in the future, or that isn't worth paying for every single fight. It's like, would you actually pay for this co-feature? And people want it. And I
Right.
think that's something that needs to change in boxing.
Do you think there's enough of it though? Do you think you have enough of it to do a main event per se like Crawford and Spence, and then have Boots as a co-feature? Do you have enough of those in different weight classes to make that happen?
And I'm not even saying it always has to be like that, but how do we stage them to where people are familiar with these guys? Because I bet you a whole lot of people don't actually know who Boots is, other than diehards, but they're aware of who Crawford and Spence was.
Right, right. I mean, look, I mean, personally, I did that for the show in Philadelphia. I put James Byrne in with with a kid named Jimenez, and I put Falcoa in with Dahu in hopes that the winners would fight each other on Showbox, and hoping that I thought it was going to be Bernardin and Dahu winning, and I would have put those two on Showbox together.
Hmm.
It didn't work out that way, you know. So
Yeah,
I know what you're getting at, but it doesn't always work out the way we want it to work for sure.
and then back to the kind of influencer thing. If we look at Tank Davis versus Ryan Garcia, on paper, Spence Crawford should have been a way more of a high profile fight.
Oh, without a doubt.
But Tank Garcia did twice the pay per view numbers. They
Wow.
literally did twice the pay per view numbers. And Garcia and Tank, from a social media aspect, Garcia is number one. You know, he has that kind of influencer, friends with YouTubers, friends with people in these other spheres. And Tank, he has a massive following too.
But in all honesty, that's why promoters are signing fighters that have a huge following
Hmm.
because it can help market the fight.
Yeah.
You
So how do
know,
we kind of mold those two things together versus just not? I'm not hating on Jake Paul, but allowing just somebody to come out of nowhere and he's actually moving the needle in the sport versus these kids who are technically very, very good and they just don't have any marketing behind them.
I mean, I think that to some extent, if the product was consistently good and competitive, um, some of the marketing takes care of itself. You know, like so. And I hate to keep comparing boxing to UFC because that it's very technical. I mean, UFC is just one sort of league of MMA. It's just become
Yeah.
sort of like the preeminent league of MMA, and it's very high profile. And you know, it was probably able to do what it did because it came on at a time when the sport was sort of young in its infancy and not really sort of evolved into like these major power players, you know, with like their different spheres of influence, which is what boxing is now. And you know, to get people, I think, at the highest levels to like truly cooperate would be really hard, especially if they're still making money and being successful doing what they're doing now. And you know, I think they are to some extent. I mean, and that's why it's hard to really change things. But at the same time, while I think maybe, you have a Top Rank that's successful or a PBC that's successful or a Matchroom, I mean, I think the sport is hurting, it's dying at the lower levels, which are really, which feed the highest levels of the sport. Whereas, um, but it's not that easy to solve either, because I think, Marshall, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't that sort of the vision of PBC when it kind of came out, was that it was going to consolidate all the best people in boxing into one stable, and then, I don't want to say be like UFC, but sort of be like the preeminent um, boxing promoter and be able to sort of do the best against the best and sort of the build ups and all those sort of things. But they just couldn't really, I guess you could say, consolidate enough power.
Right.
Like,
Yeah, I think that might have been part of their plan because they signed over 300 boxers, That's why
Yeah.
they got sued by Top Rank saying that they were trying to have a monopoly on the sport. Uh, I think that that might have been in the back of their mind. I really don't know what their initial uh, plan was, but it sure enough seemed like it was the same as what UFC was. They just couldn't keep it together. You know, and look, let's be honest. The same with King's Promotions. If we have a stable of 40 boxers and we have six of them in the same weight division and they all have about the same amount of fights, why not put one against the other and allow the fights to take place instead of having to look outside somewhere else? I mean, it's the right way to go. It really is. It just makes things easier, like what UFC is doing. I mean, UFC doesn't have to go around looking for a fighter at 135. They have
Mhm.
how many of them, and they all seem to fight because it doesn't worry about, they're not worried about whether they have two losses or zero losses. So yeah, no, it's definitely the right business plan in my opinion in order to have success uh, among your own group.
Yeah, to me, the UFC is like if Top Rank and PBC joined as one, and
Correct. Well, let's even
there's
add
no
let's add more to
competition.
that. Let's add
Yeah,
Top Rank, PBC, and Matchroom all as one. You know what I mean?
yeah,
That's really
yeah,
what they're like. I mean, they have the MMA fighters from all over. And if
yeah.
somebody falls out within a few days, they have someone else that they can replace them with instantly. Where like Anthony Joshua's fight fell out with Dylan White, and they had to go outside to PBC to get Hellenius, you know. So it wasn't like they could go within their own group and pull a heavyweight in there. They had to go outside to get someone, which probably cost them a lot more money.